Thank you, Nick. I don't have an automatically generated speech to make. I'd just like to invite our panelists up here. I am really pleased and fortunate to be able to host the opening panel for today. We have an amazing set of experts here. I am personally really excited to hear what they have to say. Each of them, I think, with a different perspective on generative AI. So we have Yaron Inger, who's a co-founder and CTO of Lightricks. We have Amit Mandelbaum, who is co-founder and CTO of Everminds. And we have Yoav Ankai, who is a partner at Fresh Fund. And I would like to pass the mic down and have each of you tell us something about how generative AI fits with what you are excited about in your work today.
How much time do we have? Because I can talk for like 24 hours straight. Okay, so for those of you who here knows about Lightricks, heard something about Lightricks? Okay, most of you, okay. First of all, amazing. For those of you who don't know, we created a company 10 years ago with the vision of bridging imagination and creation. And back then, when we were PhDs from computer science here, about 500 meters from here, in the old Ross building. It seems like a crazy dream, right? And that's why it's a vision. In the last 6 months or maybe a bit more, like it seems that this is becoming reality, and we're living in a sci-fi movie where every one of us can imagine something, and it can be like a photo that we want to generate. It can be text. It can be 3D model. It's becoming like the future is going to be also videos and other kind of media, and just create this. So seeing this come to life is pretty amazing. We, in the company, started incorporating these models like very, very quickly into production. You can now play with our apps and use this on your own mobile phones. But I also think that things that are very, very exciting is how it changes our daily life. So besides creating these features and publishing it to as many users as possible, also how we create content, how we develop software, how we market our apps, right? How we write, like how we use like the copywriting abilities of language models, how we combine everything together. For example, create a website with content, with images, with text, with everything, and basically empowering the employees that we have. I think it's something that's very, very interesting, and we're putting a lot of weight and effort into incorporating everything that we have, like models like Copilot for writing code and ChatGPT, obviously like everywhere, to ensure that every employee is now becoming like 10 virtual employees, and that is doing like 10 times the amount of work that they used to do.
I'll continue from what Yaron said. So yeah, we are a very young startup. We are basically 6 employees. We were founded around 5 months ago, and again, there are 2 aspects that we see. One is how we build a startup in the area of generative AI, and how we can do a work of 50 people with just 5 people. We use generative AI for basically anything. Most of our prototyping, most of our coding is done with generative AI. A lot of the product managers' work is done with generative AI. Most of our visualization, experimentation with our products. We also ask a lot of questions and get good answers, either technical or commercial. And also a nice anecdote, our name was chosen by ChatGPT. After describing like what's our idea, he gave us a few names, and we chose one that the domain was actually available, which was quite rare. But we are most excited about the developments that are ongoing, and we see that each time we bumped into some technical difficulty, around a week later, this new paper comes out that solves this technical problem, and then we implement it after a few days, which is really amazing. This is something that I think never happened in at least the history I remember, and I've been around in AI for almost 10 years now. So for us, it's really exciting. And we are very happy to incorporate the latest development, mostly AI agents. I don't know who here heard about it, but really, really excited about this and how we use this product to not help you work with your computer better, but help people work together better and do tests and things and communicate better.
Brilliant. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Yoav. I'm with Fresh Fund. We're a pre-seed venture capital fund founded here in Jerusalem, investing in very early stage startup companies, Israeli startup companies. I'm super excited about AI because from putting my hat as a venture capital investor on, I'm excited because I think the economic and financial potential is just enormous. The ability to streamline so much of what we do and not only accelerate many mundane processes, but also improve their quality, just encapsulates so much financial potential for the world as a whole. And on a personal level, I've been working with language models and language interfaces for years now, mainly because I think it's just very, very cool. And so I'm very happy to be here and talk about these things more in depth. Thank you so much.
Great. Maybe we can talk next a little bit about possible models for LLMs to be monetized, or generative AI more generally to be monetized. I think there are a number of possible ways we may see an impact on industry and a number of different sort of monetization models. And maybe you can reflect either on things that are relevant to companies you're involved in or just things that you think we might see in the coming years.
Okay, so it's actually, in our opinion, this is a complicated topic, and the question is, are we talking about monetizing it right now, which we do like at this minute, or we're talking about like the end goal of what's going to happen, like in, I don't know, 3, 5, 10 years from now. I think that right now there's obviously like arbitrage gaps between what you guys have and what you can use, and what's like available in the cutting edge research. Just because it takes time to implement all these algorithms and the papers that come out and push it to everyone. So OpenAI are doing it like quite well. So what you're seeing like in, I don't know, GPT-4, right, is pretty much like cutting edge. But there are things like in our domain, which is more like visual, like we're like kind of like the first company that pushed certain technologies to production. For example, I don't know how many of you heard about Stable Diffusion, which is an open source model to generate images, like Midjourney does. Midjourney has a closed source model, but we also use like Stable Diffusion, and we were the first company to integrate ControlNet, which is an ability to actually have much more fine-grained control over the result, and we use it in various features across all of our products in different and surprising configurations. So currently there's this arbitrage gap. I think that eventually, like what we're going to see is that these models are going to be more open source. Like you've seen that the open source models are becoming more and more successful. So Stable Diffusion is one example. Another example is Llama, which is a model that it's not really open source, right? It was leaked from Meta. We don't know if it was leaked intentionally or not. But there is a post by someone from Google who claims that no one has moat at this point because, like, and he actually describes like how fast the community moves and gives the example of the Llama model being leaked, and 2 weeks after it's running on Raspberry Pi, which is like this really like small like computer used to like stream media, right? You wouldn't expect a model that is huge to run on these things, with fine-tuning to chats and not just to sentence completion, et cetera, et cetera. So the power of the community is just insane. And thinking about like IP, like the whole IP of this thing, and think also about like the base model of GPT, right? It's just a set of numbers. It's just like a model with weights, which you can, if it leaks, right? It's not like IP, it's not code, it's not algorithm, it's just like a set of numbers that currently it just costs like a ton of money to train, right? It's like millions and tens of millions of dollars of GPUs like running in parallel to train these models with like ton of billions of parameters, right? And these models are just going to get bigger, and it will still be very expensive to train until we're going to have like very specialized hardware to train them. So I think that like eventually, it's currently, my answer is that it's unclear how companies are going to monetize this thing. So one thing that, like if you like remove the part of the foundational models that are going to be available for everyone, you can always say, hey, like some companies are going to have data that others don't. So for example, we're going to have data of what our users like to create, right? And we're trying to build, maybe we'll talk later about agents, we're trying to build like a creative agent that will do whatever you want in your style, with the composition that we know that you like, etc., right? So you can say, hey, like Lightricks have this data and no one else has, and you as a user, you have a lock-in to Lightricks, right? For example, like you have right now for, I don't know, Google, because your email is in Google, or you have a lock-in to Adobe because you know how to use Photoshop, and it's just a lock-in in terms of experience of how to use the tool. But when you have an agent, it's unclear to me how you can just create another agent and you'll say, okay, now this agent talk to our agent for everything that you want to do, and it's just going to copy, like eventually, all the preferences from this agent, right? So unless there are going to be some regulations around these things, it's really unclear to me how companies are going to preserve this data. And currently, this is like fairly open, right? Think about the example I gave from Llama, like the way it's got leaked, like no one has sued anybody for using this model, like even for commercial use. People are creating images from models, like Stable Diffusion was, we know because the initial data set is open, right? So we know it was trained on images that are copyrighted. Currently, no one got sued for it. I mean, there are some litigations going on, but like Japan, for example, last week said that they're going to allow like generating content from LLMs and from diffusion models, and it's not going to be there's not going to be a litigation about it. So maybe other countries will follow. So it's really, really hard to tell how the future is going to look like.
Okay, so first of all, I must say that I don't really agree with the statement that open source is going to be at the same level. I actually think there is a real moat. We have a small group of developers meeting Sam Altman and Ilya Sutskever. It was like, I don't remember, Monday. And I think there is a real moat there around the research and the models that they use. And I think that the open source market will always be few years behind, and the gap is actually going to get bigger as years go by. I do think that open source models are going to be part of the products that people are building, so it will be some sort of a combination. For example, agent is something that you can't use with open source model. You can't even use it with GPT 3.5 for most of the time. It only works well with GPT 4, but we'll have to see. I do think, and maybe it would surprise you, I don't think that I think the question of how you monetize LLMs is not the correct question, because for me it's a tool, and you don't ask, oh, how are you going to monetize Python, or how are you going to monetize cloud technology? In my opinion, people that want to build companies or build products over it just need to think about the product the same way that people thought about it for the last 20 years. Solve a real problem, have a real moat that is not dependent on the generative AI stuff, and there you'll be good. Otherwise, if you are building your entire technology based on LLMs and in your entire innovation based on LLMs, you're in big trouble. One of the companies that I think the most prominent example is Jasper AI, which was building copywriting tools and an advertising tool based on, which was basically a very thin layer over GPT, and they were at the peak valued around 1.5 billion. And now they don't have a real moat, because you can basically do everything and get even better result with GPT-4 and other products. So eventually, and I think this relates to also what Yaron said, eventually I think that you have a really great product. And yeah, you can integrate generative AI and add more capabilities, but eventually the users would come not because you have generative AI, but because your product is great. And I think this is the main moat that you have over other companies. So this is, in my opinion, the way to look at it.
Yeah, so I want to tie into what has been said here earlier. on some level, monetizing generative AI, and my perspective is mostly language models, which is most of what I've been working with. So you can monetize quite similar to how services have been monetized in the past. So at the foundation or the infrastructure layer, you can monetize through API calls, which is whenever you call the API and get back a response, you pay a certain small fee. And on the application layer, these models, they tie into vertical software companies that do things like WordTune, which lets you access the power of these generative models in order to streamline your daily work, and you pay a monthly fee, which is much higher than what they have to pay to the API. But I do think that there are other new opportunities sort of unlocked by this technology to monetize services in new, exciting ways. One way to look at it is we've already figured out in hundreds of years of doing business how lawyers should monetize and how accountants should monetize their services and how financial brokers should monetize their services. And as these technologies mature and get more sophisticated, they're able to replace more functions in these service stacks. And so what we've been seeing, for example, many companies doing is, for example, we have a portfolio company experimenting with using language models for customer support, and they're exploring or experimenting with a pretty interesting business model where they would acquire agencies that are currently providing customer service or customer support services to larger organizations. They would buy out these agencies and continue providing the exact same service, except now instead of keeping the same number of employees, they would just transfer many of these tasks to language models. So I think we have another company, for example, doing something very similar in law, where they could replace parts of the legal service stack with large language models and retain the same business models and the same monetization methods while providing less legal work in practice. And so I think that by thinking about these things more creatively, there is a very interesting opportunity here to come up with new business models for these software companies that were not possible in the past.
Thanks. Maybe let's talk now a little bit about the training data. And I think there are a number of angles we could take on the data. Are you concerned that we're going to run out of data? Is data going to become more public, more private? How important is the sort of the exclusivity of the training data that you have access to? I'm curious to hear various perspectives that you have on the data. Maybe we'll go reverse order this time. Or if somebody wants to go first.
Yeah, so I think data is becoming much more important than it has in the past, and we've certainly been spending a lot of time thinking about sort of those data pipelines and how and the types of software tools organizations need to manage them. I must say, I'd be pretty curious to hear the other panelists' opinions, because one thing that we've been debating with internally is this tension between large general purpose models like GPT-4, for instance, which are trained on a huge variety of different types of data, and can then complete a big range of different tasks, versus smaller, fine-tuned models trained to focus or specialize on a particular task or in a particular field. So, for example, we've seen Facebook train a model on scientific papers, right? Galactica, which didn't fare very well. And my current hunch is that we're heading towards a situation where the big foundation, like general purpose foundation models, underlie most of these applications with maybe much thinner layers on top of either fine-tuning or other kinds of technologies that refocus these models on a particular vertical. But I'd be curious to hear what the more technical guys think.
Actually, this is a very interesting question because the same question was asked to Sam Altman and Ilya Sutskever on Monday, and they said that they experienced the fact that models can either go wide or deep, but they can't do both. And therefore, they are going to offer a lot of fine-tuning mechanisms for different models because they do believe that to get very, very accurate on like critical fields like medical, security, you do need to have very, very specific data and quite a lot of it and have a model fine-tuned. I would say another interesting direction that some companies are going to, and OpenAI are going to use it, and they are already using it, is synthetic data. We are running out of textual data online, and to train like GPT-5, we need around 5 times more the entire data that we have online. And OpenAI already said that quite a lot of the data that was used for GPT-4 was data that was generated by GPT 3.5. And so they predict a sort of, they called it an event horizon, that on some point in time, these models will generate so much data, and then this would be used to train the next level of models, and I wouldn't have said it unless someone really serious said it. So this is a very interesting direction as well, and we already see it in open source models. Quite a lot of their training data is coming from ChatGPT generated conversations.
I can maybe add about data in our domain, which is the visual one. I think it's actually, it will become a problem because I think that like one thing that, Amit, maybe I didn't understand you, but you didn't say that eventually like all the data that is, or a lot of the data that is going to be created like even not intentionally by GPT, right? Or similar LLMs. So even implicitly, like if you're just going to crawl the internet and like fetch this data, you're training yourself on data generated by AI, right? And I don't know, to me it's like kind of like mind-boggling to think about if it's like actually bootstrappable, like, and you can train like more sophisticated model based on a model of like a 5-year-old, right? So you can grow to like train a 10-year-old like a person model. But from our perspective, I think that like obviously you have images and data on the internet. If you think about data that is available for commercial use, currently this is like kind of a big problem because Stable Diffusion trained on data that is, as I said, like copyrighted, right? And a lot of brands are currently really afraid, especially the bigger brands are afraid of using such models because they don't know like what's going to be the outcome of it. And the only models diffusion models that are currently available that trained on a data set that is available for commercial use is Midjourney and Adobe Firefly, which is currently in beta. And if you think about the entire market of stock photos, there aren't a lot of companies that actually have reasonable data sets. So there is like Getty and Shutterstock. There's Adobe Stock, which obviously used by Adobe, and Canva both like two stock companies, but that's more or less it. Like if you're looking at like large data sets, so it is possible that we'll see some interesting dynamics of I don't know, some few monopolies or like a duopoly or whatever that actually like have these models that are available for commercial use. So it will be very interesting to see what the legal side has to say about it, because currently, you can't just crawl the internet, crawl Instagram or like, fetch videos from TikTok and it will be just okay to train models on top of this data.
So I'm going to allow myself one more question, and then if there are folks in the audience who would like to get a chance to ask a question, we can move to that. Let's talk about the dark side a little bit. There are lots of things we can worry about in this space. You could worry about privacy issues. You could worry about AI gone wrong. You could worry about fairness issues. You could worry about concentration of power. You could worry about fake news and the implications. What worries you the most?
So we actually had a pretty lengthy discussion this week with, we have this WhatsApp group of LLM expert, and for me the most disturbing implication is fake news. We are approaching inevitably to a place where you couldn't really tell any video, audio, image, or text whether it's real or fake. And this is a major problem. We already see this problem affecting states and affecting the social media. So for me, this is, I think, the biggest problem. And I actually, unlike other problems, maybe like the AI taking over our lives or security or privacy, this is the problem that I currently don't see any kind of solution in the horizon. And this is really concerning for me.
I think I tend to agree. I think but on the other hand, think about recommender systems and what happened like in the last decade and what happens right now on like Twitter, TikTok, whatever, any social media that you use, right? So it doesn't really matter if the content is generated by AI or not. You're still like you see like the content that you want or content that someone else wants you to see. And there were endless discussions about this, so I don't need to like repeat the entire thing. But I think that eventually what happens is that people will understand that they can't really trust what they see, and the question is how much time this will take, like for people to realize that. And then the question is going to be, okay, like if we're blacklisting everything, right? So how do we know that something is actually real, right? And this is going to be actually a very interesting research domain, right? There are, for example, now cameras, like if you take like professional cameras, they digitally sign photos to actually show that they were taken by a real camera, but people already like obviously hack this because the camera itself signs like the photos and like fetch the private key like from the camera so they can fake everything. So it's really unclear to me how this is going to roll, but I think that the first thing for everyone to know is that nothing is real anymore, and just educate people about this thing. I can say that personally, like in Lightricks, for those of you who don't know, like our first most successful product is Facetune. It's a product for retouching. And we got a lot of feedback from users about like why you're making this tool, why you're making it available for everyone. And I know maybe you're too young, so you don't remember. There used to be the Photoshop law in Israel. I think it was about 2005-06, where you had to write for every like retouched photo in ad that the model was photoshopped, retouched, whatever. And I think that right now it's fairly clear to everyone, like because it wasn't like these retouching tools became available for everyone, not just for expert retouchers who use Photoshop and learned this for a few months, right? So it's obvious that everything that you see is retouched, and no one is just posting him or her photo on Instagram just like that, right? So I think the same process needs to go through, the society needs to go through with everything that's going on with AI now, and we're the ones who are responsible to educate our users about this.
I'd like to add to that another aspect of generative AI that worries me personally, and that is the societal impact these models might have. So over the past 200 or so years, we've had the luxury of gradually adapting to a world where carpenters aren't really a thing, shoemakers aren't really a thing, right? We've had this gradual transformation where production of goods became much, much, much cheaper because we've learned how to manufacture these goods. And the same thing is happening right now to services, but at a much, much quicker pace. So I take it many of you here are studying computer science and may become engineers. Do we still need engineers a decade from now in the same way we need them today? What would that profession look like? What are the impacts on lawyers and accountants and truck drivers and all these different people and professions that now form the backbone of our modern economies, when suddenly AI can do a similar job, or at least many parts of those jobs, much more quickly, much more efficiently, and with much higher quality. And how do we sort of reorganize society in a world where that, in a future where that, where AI takes our place at all these tables? That's what worries me on a personal level.
On that cheery note, I would like to open the floor to questions if anyone would like to speak. If not, I can ask more questions. Give you a second to think.
Hello, my name is Nitai. I'm an alum from, what was it we were second generation. We finished it. Yeah. Thank you for coming here, and it's been very interesting. I have one question about the last topics, mainly what Yoav said, but like to ask about any optimistic side of it, if we can get it. Many people, or many jobs actually, would be slowly eradicated, or fast actually. But the question is, what can maybe the people who would now not become carpenters and also not become maybe computer science or engineers and so on, what jobs, maybe new jobs, would be born, and in a way that everyone still, or most people would still have jobs, but we'll be able to do many more things. Like each person would be like 50 people, but each person would do something new, something like the startup of Amit, for example. So we'd have many more startups maybe, and each startup would be producing at the level of what now big companies are able to do. Do you have any optimistic vision towards this idea? Thank you.
All right, who wants to take the future of work?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think the flip side of what I described earlier is that we can sort of reorganize society in a way that makes people much happier and more fulfilled in their daily lives. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to do that. I have no idea how. I think one interesting idea people have been exploring is UBI, or universal basic income, or basically better social safety nets that would enable people to focus on their hobbies or learning or other things that fulfill them. But I can't say we've explored those ideas sufficiently at this point in time. As venture capital investors, I think we should have had a sociologist on the panel as well. that would have been an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I think the optimistic future is, in my opinion, and why I think the generative AI has much more potential than to do good than bad, is that it would take most of our mundane and technical and repetitive things that we do in our daily lives, and would hopefully create a society when we can work less and get paid the same, and would clear us quite a lot of time for creative tasks, being with our family, having social activities. So this is like my optimistic take on this one.
Interesting. I didn't expect like the last part. No, because I'm not sure that people will work less. I think it's more like a cultural thing. Like look at the amount of hours people work in Israel versus like other countries. Don't know if it's going to change. Maybe our culture here will change. I do think, however, that again, I think that the gap between like imagining something and actually creating it, maybe even in the real world, but for sure, like in the digital world, like it's going to get much, like the gap is going to get much smaller, right? Which mean that I think that we, like as I'm now thinking about, for example, how my kids will need to adapt to this. My oldest daughter is starting elementary school next year. and it's unclear how the future is going to look like when she'll finish like high school, right? I think that like being able to dream, being able to imagine, and understand like different aspects of creation is something that's really, really important. I think that the current like education system is really bad at these things, like, right? They just turn you off mostly. And yeah, I'm not talking about the university. Yeah. I'm talking more about, you know, when you're a young kid and you usually like get excited by lots of things, right? I'm not sure that our current system is even not, you know, hasn't like adopted the internet like very well, right? So talking about AI, like I think this is a bit worrying, but I think that as, you know, as parents and as people like in the community, I think this is like something that's really, really important, because eventually you're going to have like this agent, right? I don't know what's going to be the interface of this agent, but probably one of these interfaces is going to be like voice, right? You're just going to speak to some agent like in a sci-fi movie, right? And things are going to happen and start, you know, working for you. So as Amit said, like all the work that we are now like don't really want to do, and all this clutter is going to go away, and we're just going to be left with, okay, what do we want to create, right? And what do we want to do today? So, and this is something that's maybe only when we get to AGI, like this part will be solved somehow, but until then, like we'll have to make it up by ourselves. So dreaming big is really important.
All right, time for one more question. Maya, and I saw you first. Sorry, I need one second. I don't want to sit up front.
Is that okay that my question is a bit for you?
Sure.
We're in a really interesting place in time where academia and the private sector are sort of like going on separate ways, because the private sector is like Microsoft, Open, and AI, like all those companies have resources that the academia doesn't really, like they cannot sustain those kind of resources. So we see more and more researchers combining like closed models in their work. So how do you see the future of research, like especially in computer science? Because it seems like computer science going towards like more of like a statistical, maybe like sort of like biology, where you observe like you see and you like what you observe what a model do, and you don't really, it's not really well defined. So how do you see this shift? And if you maybe want to add to, how do you see the role of academia? And yes, thank you.
It's a great question. I think there are a lot of shifts kind of simultaneously, and I can't say for sure where all of them are going. Maybe I'm an optimist here on the side of academia, but I really do think that the need for sort of foundational thinking, for interdisciplinary perspectives, for the kinds of things that are, I think, better suited to the academic environment, where the pace is sometimes, I don't want to say slower, but not driven by sort of the market cycle, and where the goals are not also driven by the money, but maybe also driven by sort of foundational inquiry. I think there's still enormous need and enormous impact for that kind of work. It's certainly true, though, that some really interesting questions are going to be best answered with enormous resources. And those enormous resources are not found currently in academia. And so it's possible we're going to see an evolution in terms of the ways that academia and industry will interact. I don't know for sure. I think there are a lot of really interesting questions sort of intertwined there. Anyone else want to speak to this one?
I can say something short. I think that like it's a great question. I don't think it's just like that generative AI affects it dramatically. I think we've seen it like in the last decade when deep neural networks started, right? Like you just need a ton of computational power that a lot of the universities just don't have. Also, like maintaining this is very expensive. The hardware itself is very expensive. But I think that what we saw is a lot of collaboration between the academia and the industry. So you have a lot of papers that are joint work by people. You're seeing also when you have advancements in the fields, for example, like the control net that I described earlier. It's a work by Stanford, right? It's not a work by Google. It's not a work by Meta. So there are people like moving around between the industry and the academia. So I think that like they're going to be much like more joint work because I think as it was said here, like there is like this work that can be done together, like the slow work that is not like business driven and outside of the product cycle that is really, really quick these days. It's not going to be done by companies. Microsoft tried like to open some kind of academia in Microsoft Research. They poured like $4 billion a year. Every year, like for the last, few decades, it didn't really work that well for them. So I think this domain is going to stay in the academia, and I think the more like fast pacing, fast innovation, and usage of a ton of resources is going to stay in the industry. But I think there's going to be a lot of collaboration, and for example, like models that are going to be shared between the industry and the academia, and we're all going to enjoy that. It's a very good question. Thank you.
So we're out of time, but I'd like to, if you would like, ask each of you to offer one sentence of advice for young people coming out into the world of work now and in the next few years. Folks who have both a technical background and sort of a broader perspective on technology. One sentence of advice, if anyone has something to offer.
I think it probably was always true, but I think it's really, really true right now that you should stay always learning and always curious. I'm reading papers today, like I finished my master's degree 6 years ago, and I'm reading more papers today, academic papers today, than I read when I was learning here. So always be on top of things, always be curious, always be learning and developing new skills.
On a micro level, I think there needs to be more focus or more attention paid to interfaces and the ways we interact with these new technologies, both as individuals and as a society more broadly. And I think for people who are graduating university in 2023, it's a very exciting time, I think, to be entering the job market, especially if you spend time thinking about these interfaces. So that's one piece of guidance that I would give.
I think that it's one of the greatest years to finish university and go to the industry and build something. Basically, every domain is just, in my opinion, doesn't have moat right now. So just go and build something. Like you can disrupt everything. And for those of you who are not convinced, maybe in the intermission I can convince you that everything is disruptible. So just think about a domain that you're excited about and go disrupt it.
Great. Let's thank our panelists.